Katey and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a video that I sort of promised you I would do before I went on my break, so I'm here to make it up to you. This was a very highly requested video and basically we're going to be talking about my decks that I sort of think of as my therapeutic decks, and some of these more obviously fit into that mental wellness category. Some of them slightly less so. These are the decks that I don't use for reading or even daily draws. These are the decks that I really specifically use for my mental health, my mental well-being. So basically I have 4 decks here that I want to talk to you about. Some are much more obviously designed for mental wellness, and they're literally about therapy systems that exist and that have been studied and that are used by psychologists and psychiatrists. Others more straddle the line of Oracle deck, but the way that I use them is sort of similar. So I wanted to talk about them all today. First, we'll talk about the ACT or the ACT deck. And this I actually got recommended by the lovely Imogen Walters here on YouTube. And it is also the deck that used to feature in my old video intro. A lot of people would always ask me about that. It's this deck. It's very pretty. Also very practical. So ACT or ACT is a very popular and widespread therapy system, which stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. I'm not going to detail what these therapy systems are. Just know that I've done a bit of ACT in group therapy settings and I really liked it. So I was excited about this deck. I'll read you our blurb. It says, build connection, find focus, and reduce stress. The ACT deck offers 55 practices based on acceptance and commitment therapy for use in therapy, classrooms, or at home. These cards ask tough questions, encourage meaningful action, and provide new perspectives to help you let go of negative thoughts and live in the present moment. So this deck doesn't come with a guidebook or anything. Instead, we just get one single card that explains how to use the deck. And it is pretty straightforward and you can experiment and use it in lots of different ways, but this is a good starting point. This deck is just full of exercises or practices that are core to ACT or ACT. And basically the deck has 3 different categories. The first is the open category, and the exercises in this category help you focus on your full experience and teach you to notice and lean into difficult or painful thoughts, feelings, memories, or physical sensations. The second category is the aware category. These exercises will help you incorporate mindfulness into your everyday life and increase your contact with the present moment. And third is the engaged category. Life is about the doing. The exercises on these cards will help you do more no matter what pain shows up. So these cards are a great introduction to how you can actually use ACT in your life and how it can be beneficial to our mental well-being. Obviously, it's just a deck of cards, so it's not like a thorough course, and it's not going to break down the hows and whys of, what's included in ACT and why it works and how it works, all of that. This is really more about the practical application of the practices and exercises that are integral to ACT. So for me, as someone who's done a little bit of ACT therapy, I find this a really good way to sort of incorporate things that I learnt several years ago, but might not always be super well practiced in or might not be doing all the time. So for me, there's a few different ways that I use this deck, especially around if I'm trying to sort of practice the skills that I learnt in ACT. I might just, shuffle this deck and draw a card or a couple of cards and try to incorporate that practice or that skill in my day or my week. Other times, if I'm not doing super great, if I'm, sort of struggling with some difficult emotions or difficult experiences, I might then divide the deck up into its separate sections, and it's great because the backings are different for each of the categories. And then depending on which category I feel like might be more useful for me in this moment, I will look through and consciously choose something that feels like it might be supportive of me in this moment. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm in a bit of a difficult state, I won't say in crisis, but if I'm, kind of struggling with challenging emotional experiences, sometimes I just sort of forget what skills and practices that I've learned over the years. So this is a good memory jog of what can I do that will actively help me right now? Each of the card provides enough information to sort of get you going, but it also isn't cumbersome or overly academic or anything like that. They're really quick and to the point and just accessible in the moment. The next deck I want to talk to you about is the Dialectical Behavioral Therapy Skills card deck. I've spoken about on this channel before how DBT is the therapy system that I really love and that did a lot for me. And the little subtitle here is 52 practices to balance your emotions every day. I found this deck through the shop that I work at. I work at the TS bookshop and we got some decks in and I ordered one for myself. There is also a workbook that you can buy by the same people that sort of use the same principles if you want to dive into DBT a little bit more. So DBT is a system of therapy that was originally kind of created. It's based on CBT in a lot of ways, but it also incorporates a lot of mindfulness and other practices, and it was originally created to help people with borderline personality disorder. It's also used for people with bipolar disorder, but I just think it's a really great therapy system, particularly for people who struggle with quite big, overwhelming emotions. DBT is structured into 4 sort of sections. They are mindfulness, emotional regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness. And so those 4 categories is also how this deck is split up. As with the last deck, we have a couple of cards that sort of introduce us to the deck and explain how we can use it. They suggest that you can either shuffle all the cards together and select 1 card each day and complete that exercise, or that you can keep separate the cards from each of the 4 skill sets, select 1 card from each skill set every day, 4 cards in total, and complete those 4 exercises that day. I use this deck in very much the same sort of way that I explained I do with the ACT deck, in that it depends sort of what I'm going to the deck for. Sometimes it's that I really just want to reconnect with these skills and practices that I learned in my DBT sort of program. Other times it is that I am experiencing some distress or something and I want to be reminded of the sort of skills that I do have in my toolkit. I just might have forgotten a little bit. What I like about this deck over the ACT deck, even though they're both separated into categories, which is helpful, I think the names of the categories in DBT and in this deck are sort of like they're very obvious what you would go to in different experiences. You know, like interpersonal effectiveness skills. Like if you're struggling with a difficult relationship, or you're having to have a conflict come up soon, or you have had a conflict come up, you know which part of this deck you need to go to. Same with distress tolerance. If you're in like quite a heightened state of emotional overwhelm, then the distress tolerance skills are where you need to be going. And I especially find sort of working with this for a week or a month, if I sort of know that I'm having a bit of a difficult time, like external factors are a little bit challenging, this can sort of like be a little bit of a routine of checking in with myself and doing things proactively that can be good for me and my mental health. That can sort of be a touchstone through a more difficult emotional time, if that makes sense. Great little deck. Although these can be helpful when you are in a difficult experience, I think they're also just good for reminding you of the different exercises and practices so that you can practice them when you are in a good space, so that you're more well versed in them and that you have them at the ready in your toolbox for when you're not doing so well. These I feel like are a little bit more specific. DBT is a very structured, systematic therapy system. And so I do sort of feel like, even though I think this deck would be helpful to a lot of people, I think it would also be useful to know a bit about DBT and the systems and the ideas behind these different practices. So if you want to pick up either the workbook that, you know, sort of goes with this deck, or if you have any other resources that, you know, are accessible to you. So this is probably my favorite of these. I don't know, that's hard to say, but DBT holds a special place in my heart for how much it has helped me. And I think this is a wonderful sort of like little pocket size, I don't know, the Spark Notes version of such a big, amazing system of therapy. Next, we have the recovery cards. I just realized I think I've sort of forgotten their names, but they're by a creator called Beverly King. And these cards are all about addiction, I suppose. They're based on the 12 Steps program, which was made very famous by Alcoholics Anonymous. But it removes all of like the really heavy religious sort of language and the more, I don't know, sort of dogmatic approach that can sort of feed through in a lot of 12 Steps AA stuff. I have also written on the names of the cards because it wasn't really included. They are numbered, which you can then reference the little guidebook that Beverly King emails you. But I found it helpful to actually have them written on the card. So this is my handwriting here. So these little cards sort of depict the principles and the ideas of AA just in a much more sort of neutral way. And I've personally found this very helpful for quite specific elements of my mental health journey, I suppose. Obviously with 12 Steps program being directly related to AA, with my substance abuse, I found this a great little deck. But I've also found it very helpful for other things that are sort of like maladaptive behaviors that can become like compulsive tendencies, like my perfectionism. I feel like that is quite a similar, not similar experience, but has similar sort of roots to it that I found this little deck quite helpful with. Now this deck I do use a little bit more like an oracle deck than the previous two. This one I actually do enjoy doing small spreads with, but they're very specific spreads about, you know, this sort of experience that's related to this deck. I do also enjoy just drawing one card and sort of, you know, again, practicing a skill or considering an idea that can be helpful to me. So it's a sweet little deck. I've had it for ages, so I don't even know if it's still available, but if I can find links and information, I'll leave it below in the description box. And then finally, probably the deck that deviates the most from, you know, like the mental health, self-care, I don't know, realm specifically, is this one. It is the Cups of Contemplation cards by the one and only Juli from Peekaboo Rose. So these are really, really sweet little cards that Juli has created herself, and they basically have just really pretty cups and mugs of tea and coffee, whatever you want to imagine they are. I think of them as tea because I'm a tea drinker. And they also have just really sort of gentle and loving but thought-provoking questions that we can contemplate over a cuppa. I've seen Juli and others sort of use these cards, like they'll draw a card that has a question and then use a different tarot or oracle deck to then draw a card from that to answer the question, which is a great way to use these cards. I think another way to use these cards would also just be for, you know, drawing a card and then using that as a journaling prompt. And this is probably the deck that I use most as an oracle, or closest to how I use oracle decks, in the sense that sometimes I do just draw a card for the day and I let that question sort of frame what I want to focus on or what I want to think about, or how I can, I don't know, consider my priorities for the day. So there's a whole lot of different ways that you can use this deck. Those are some of the ways that I have. And even though it isn't, you know, like a ACT deck or a DBT deck or a deck about the 12 steps program, it still feels like it fits into this category for me, at least the way that I use it. Because when I go to this deck, I'm very much thinking about, you know, kind of what's going on in my head and how, you know, my mental state is influencing my life and vice versa. I don't know, it just really gets me in that sort of frame of mind where I want to think about my mental well-being and being my best self. Making sure I'm engaging with the world in a healthy way, making sure that I'm supported, all of that sort of stuff. So those are my 4 decks that I sort of think of as my therapeutic decks. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any other decks that you think would fit into this category. Please know I'm not advocating, you know, cards over therapy or medication or anything like that. For me, this is very much a supportive exercise that I do on top of the other things that I have in my life that help me be a well version of myself. And I very much believe that whatever works for you is what you need to be doing. So I hope you found this video helpful or interesting. Thank you to those of you who've requested it and been patient after you requested it. But that is all from me for now, so thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you in the comments and see you in the next video. So much love. Bye.